Welcome back. You're watching Credlin. Well, under the Andrews government roadmap, Victoria will enter a COVID normal when there are no new cases at all for 28 days and no active cases. It doesn't stop there. There can't also be any outbreaks of concern in any other states or territories. Is this even achievable? Let's bring in our expert. Professor Peta Collignon is an epidemiologist with the University of New South Wales and COVID-19 advisor to the World Health Organisation, the ANU too, I think, there as well. He joins me now from Canberra. Thank you for your time, Professor Collignon. You're the expert. How achievable is this plan in Victoria?
Well, this is a strategy for elimination, which you might achieve in the short term, but it's not sustainable, in my view, over the medium term. The people that have really tried this, in New Zealand, and in fact Victoria tried or talked about it in April, and it patently hasn't worked. The only country in the world that's still got elimination is Taiwan as a country. But the real problem with elimination is that you've got to actually have a vaccine that's 90% effective if you really want to sustain it for a respiratory virus. The only two examples we've got of successful elimination of respiratory viruses are for measles and German measles, or rubella. And in both of those, we've got a vaccine that's 90% effective. So you may achieve it in the short term. You know, certain areas of Australia have already got it. Adelaide, Canberra, Perth, and a lot of regional New South Wales and most other states, the regional areas. But to sustain it is very difficult because it's so easy for the virus to be reintroduced and spread. And the problem is, if you think you've got elimination, everybody thinks we can go back to normal. Well, that's just a recipe for when the virus, or if and when the virus comes back in, it spreads much more widely than if you are more suspicious it's there, you're doing a lot of testing all the time to make sure it's not, so that you keep your distance, you keep some minimum requirements to really make sure that the spread doesn't go rampant if it is reintroduced.
A lot of criticism today from, the PM and the Health Minister, of course, but also Professor Murphy, that Victoria's contact tracing, which is obviously the key to getting out of these restrictions and meeting those thresholds on October 26th, less than 5, at the end of November down to 0, that it's just not up to scratch compared to, say, New South Wales. Again, you're expert in this area. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the available evidence is it isn't as good, both their public announcements as well. I mean, New South Wales, if you had a restaurant or a workplace that was identified as being a cluster, they would name it. In Victoria, back in May and June, that didn't seem to be the case. Also, their contact tracing wasn't as good as New South Wales because they had a lot more ongoing cases in May and June than New South Wales, which is bigger. And when you hear stories about people not being contacted, at least on the media, for many days after they've had a positive result, that also says it's not quite there. If you want to get really good suppression or elimination, which is supposedly what they're aiming for, you've got to make sure that all the contacts of a known case are contacted within 48 hours so that they can be isolated, tested, etc. And you can't actually have it so it's many days or even a week later, which seems to be in the case, more recently. Now, if you're overwhelmed with 700 cases, you can see how that may not happen. But it really would be nice, how many cases can they really do efficiently? Is it 10 a day? Is it 20 a day? Is it 40 a day? Because every case you have requires a lot of contact. There might be 50 people or more you have to contact. So that requires a reasonable resource that had to be in place. And Victoria seemed to have less in place at the beginning of this than, say, New South Wales.
And they're catching up very slowly. Professor Collignon, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
There's also a lot of debate too whether we should have a federal contact tracing system. I think that will be one of the issues that is hotly debated after we get through the worst of this pandemic.